Greetings of the day, dear learners. This is Dr. Shamili Mandal and I am back with my 10th module. And in this, I will be talking about folk and modern society and the challenges and acceptances associated with it. Here, I will give you 5 lectures like the earlier modules. In the first lecture, I will be talking about modern society, modern problem. In the second lecture, I will be talking about lessons from East and Northeast India. In the third, I will be talking about lessons from North India. In the fourth, lessons from Central and West India. And in the fifth one, lessons from South India. Now, we will start our lecture, that is the modern society and the modern problems associated with it. Firstly, I will be talking about the degeneration of the modern society through the shaming of folk culture, which can be viewed through a variety of lenses including cultural imperialism and the decline of traditional values and globalization. Folk culture, which represents the habits, traditions, language and practices of local groups, is significantly stigmatized or marginalized in favor of more modern or globalized standards. This issue has resulted in both the loss of cultural identity and the breakdown of social cohesion in many communities. Here, I have attached a photo, as you can see, of a woman who is draped in, you can say, who is kind of wearing ornaments, gold ornaments, but she is reflecting the goddess. And she is, you can say, marketing the gold ornament which she is wearing. It means that people or the society is using religious aspects for modern marketing of stuffs and other things we have. Cultural imperialism is the dominance of one culture over others, frequently achieved through the spread of media, language and consumer goods from powerful nations. Western media in particular promotes a uniform global culture that frequently criticizes folk customs as obsolete, primitive or irrelevant. This subtle or overt cultural dominance pushes communities to renounce their traditions in favor of mainstream lifestyles. Folk culture, as we know, is deeply ingrained in ideals, including community cooperation, ancestry respect, environmental harmony and spiritual traditions. As modernity focuses on individualism, materialism and rapid technological improvement, traditional values are considered to be as barriers for modernization, which it is not. In many civilizations, seniors previously revered as knowledge bearers have seen their responsibilities eroded, while adolescents are pushed to chase globalized goals. While globalization has advantages like economic growth and cross-cultural exchange, it also promotes cultural homogenization. The process by which various cultures become more similar. This frequently entails the replacement of traditional rituals with a global culture that prioritizes broad appeal and marketability. When communities lose connection with their traditional culture, they often feel dislocated. So, we can say that cultural identity is a part of one's culture. As we all identify with our own culture and it becomes a marker or we can say a symbol of what we are. Our culture forms our identity, and once we are blended with another culture, we are no more, we can say, a major part of our culture, rather a human being or an evolved one assimilating and adapting to various cultures. In severe circumstances, this can lead to intergenerational conflict, mental health issues, and even the formation of nationalist or reactionary movement as people attempt to recapture a lost sense of purpose and identity. Despite these problems, there is a growing push to revive and preserve traditional culture. From indigenous language revitalization projects to folk music festivals and traditional artisan cooperatives, many communities are trying to preserve and adapt their cultural heritage in modern times. Such efforts highlight the tenacity of local cultures and the need of protecting cultural variety in the face of global challenges. We should remember that when we are deflecting from our core folk culture due to modernization, it is giving us the modern problem. So, I have named my lecture as The Modern Society Giving Rise to Modern Problems. Next, I come to how folk culture has been marginalized in many nations in favor of Western style modernism, which is fueled by mass media, globalized consumerism, and technology. Indigenous cultures, beliefs, clothes, music, and language are frequently seen as obsolete or inferior, whereas Western culture is praised for its progressiveness and sophistication. So, in our culture, as I said that the Ghumar dance or the photo which I have attached is also a traditional dance form, or you can say an indigenous dance form. But due to commercialization, or you can say due to westernization or making it more appealing to the people, they are distorted in present times. They are kind of modified, and you can see the modification is not happening in a positive manner, rather it is actually harming the essence of it. But that is how modernization is, we can say, taking a part of our culture. Many indigenous languages are disappearing as younger generations acquire mainstream languages such as English, Spanish and Mandarin. So, I am giving you a worldview actually. For example, Aboriginal languages in Australia have experienced significant deterioration. Only around 13 of the 250 languages are still spoken by children today. English, as promoted by the media and school, is regarded as the language of success and opportunity. Traditional apparel is frequently supplanted by Western style clothing, which is regarded as more modern and socially acceptable. For example, in India, younger urban populations prefer jeans, t-shirts and suits to saris and kurta pajamas. While traditional dress is still used at festivals, it is no longer the standard for many people. Western musical styles like pop, rock and hip hop dominate worldwide chart and local youth preferences, relegating indigenous music to the outskirts. For example, in Africa, instruments and folk rhythms are giving way to Afrobeats and global pop in mainstream media. And if we see, the music scenario, we have the international music scenario in the US, we find many Afro-American songwriters and music composers ruling the charts. In recent times, the US is filled with people who are not actually American, but you can say have come to America and spreading their music career. Western secularism and science-based reasoning frequently replace indigenous belief systems, which are branded as superstitious or outdated. In Latin America, for example, Christian missionary activities and Western secular education have pushed ancient Andean spiritual rituals and nature-based beliefs to the background. These behaviors are sometimes rejected as folklore rather than being recognized as legitimate cultural representations. Folk cultures are sometimes only preserved for tourism, stripped of their original context and repackaged to fit Western expectations. In Thailand, hill tribe communities often perform dances and wear traditional outfits primarily for tourists. not for community rituals or social purposes. In sum, while the Western style modernism brings certain advantages, it also contributes to cultural homogenization. Indigenous and folk cultures risk being seen as irrelevant unless deliberate efforts are made to preserve and revitalize them. We also have Bollywood's impact on Indian folk culture. And in India, the rise of Bollywood cinema and Western pop culture has resulted in the marginalization of regional folk music, dance and tradition. Classical forms of Indian music and dance such as Kathak and Bharatanatyam are frequently eclipsed by modern dance forms or Western styles. Next, I am going to talk about how urbanization, which is generally regarded as sign of protest, has led to the decline of folk culture. As people relocate to cities in quest of greater prospects, they frequently reject rural customs, rituals and traditional ways of life. In many circumstances, urban society regards rural or folk culture as archaic or primitive. I have attached here a photo of a group of elderly women who are still sticking to their culture. They are proud of their culture. But mostly if we see in the younger generation, or we can say the Gen Z or the millennials we talk about, mostly the Gen Z actually, they are not so much willing to adapt or adopt, we can say, not adopt, to you can say be proud of their own culture. It's only the elderly, as I have shown in the photo, who are trying to stick to their roots and trying to survive in their culture while promoting them in the world. Traditional diets are frequently impacted by the availability of local seasonal ingredients and cooking techniques. Food culture is an important component of daily living in rural communities, with recipes and cooking techniques that reflect the local environment and history. However, urban migration frequently results in a shift to processed fast food and convenience-based eating pattern. For example, in rural China, hand-pulled noodles and dumplings are cultural staples. However, in cities, fast food outlets and pre-packaged meals are on the rise, causing traditional food preparation practices to fade over the time. Rural social relationships are also stronger due to common experiences and the lifestyles. The communities frequently celebrate and preserve folk traditions together, making them an integral part of everyday life. However, urbanization encourages a more independent and transient lifestyle, in which people are less linked to their neighbors and local customs. Urban people sometimes prioritize work, technology and entertainment above community gathering or local festival, causing communal traditions to deteriorate or disappear entirely. Indigenous languages are disappearing when younger generations, as I have told you about the photograph, that they in rural regions forsake their native tongues too in favor for mainstream languages. For example, in the United States, Native American languages are critically endangered, with many children no longer learning their ancestors' languages, often due to the stigma associated with indigenous languages and a lack of contemporary education. Now, I will be talking about how the spread of the global consumer culture has contributed to the decline of community-based folk traditions that are frequently focused on sustainability, mutual assistance and shared responsibility. I have attached a photo here, you can see, of a Christmas celebration. And Christmas celebration, we know, is a very important part of, you can say, the religion Christianity. And though previously Christmas celebrations happened, like you can say between the communities, that the communities would come together for a day and celebrate the festivity. Now this celebration of Christmas has become more individualized. As you can see in the photograph, that it is the happening inside a house, inside a room of a house actually, which normally previously used to happen in open spaces, mainly in the, you can say, the precinct of the churches, where people used to come together and celebrate the Christmas. And also this marks that folk which is actually, as I have said, communal, it's shared, it's bonded, like bonded by people, it is becoming more individualistic, and that is, we can say, the negative aspect of modernization, that modern society is making the collective to individual. Traditionally, Diwali in India was marked with handmade decorations, oil lamps and communal gatherings centered on ritual and storytelling. However, in recent decades, the festival has become more commercialized. It now focuses primarily on retail fairs, lavish lights, displays fueled by energy, and mass-produced firecrackers that frequently pollute the environment. The focus has switched from spiritual meaning and community connection to consumer purchasing and brand marketing. Halloween in the US began as a Celtic holiday based on communal customs and folklore, but now has evolved into a highly commercial occasion dominated by candy sales, mass-produced costumes and themed items. Even in nations where Halloween was never traditionally celebrated, such as Japan or portions of Latin America, the holiday is now mostly observed through consumer-oriented events. Traditional handcrafts, for example, such as weaving, ceramics and beadwork were originally created by local artists using environment-friendly methods and passed down through generations across Latin America, Southeast Asia and Africa. These crafts were frequently imbued with cultural symbolism and communal identity. Cheap factory-made imitations now flood local and worldwide marketplaces, decreasing traditional craftspeople economic viability and causing their talents to perish. The traditional kimono, a highly symbolic and handcrafted garment, has waned in popularity, being supplanted by Western design and mass-produced apparel. The industry is currently mostly supported by ceremonial demand and tourists rather than community use or cultural practices. Agriculture used to be strongly communal in many African societies, inspired by concepts such as Ubuntu, which emphasize mutual care and shared duty. Neighbors helped each other with planting and harvesting. With urban migration and consumerist attitudes gaining traction, traditional techniques are being supplanted by individualistic and profit-driven farming practices, which are frequently linked to global agribusiness. We also have, the potlatch in indigenous North American culture, which were celebrations and entailed wealth transfer and strengthened community relationships and were both communal and non-commercial. Modern factors such as historical legal limits and present consumer culture have limited the frequency and scope of such tradition, often replacing them with global capitalizing influenced standardized gift-giving norms. Now, I come to the many folk art forms, including storytelling, handcrafting and regional music, which are considered inferior to contemporary art. Also, this shame of traditional art forms reduces their values and contributes to their demise, especially as newer generations are urged to pursue modern or commercial art forms that are perceived to be more profitable or prestigious. In Western African nations, griots, who are actually oral historians and musicians, used to hold prestigious positions in the society. Today, they are often seen as entertainers for tourists or are entirely sidelined as youth gravitate towards global pop culture and online content. Also, the traditional crafts in Africa, which were actually, like a very integral part of the tribes, because we know in Africa we have many tribes, right? Like it's full of tribes actually. So, they are also facing a crunch. Why? Because the traditional handicrafts or the weaving technology is being replaced by modern technology and machines. And the reason? Because of commercialization and globalization. It's a simple law, that we have the more demand, we have to have more supply for it. So, as the demand for these handicrafts, or you can say traditional weaving and baskets are increasing, people, are getting more technologically advanced to keep up to the demand of the people. As I said, there should be much supply to equate the much demand of these traditional handicrafts. In certain metropolitan regions, these traditional crafts are regarded also as outdated or of inferior quality. But this not only impacts craftsmen's livelihood but also jeopardizes the future of traditional crafts. But as due to modernization, they are again gaining the market. For example, Madhubani paintings in India, which were historically painted by women using natural dyes on mud walls, are now frequently commercialized or neglected in favor of Western style abstract art. As a result, many craftspeople forsake their trade since it is no longer considered commercially feasible or appreciated. Old-time music and ballads are struggling to survive in the Appalachians in the US, since younger generation prefer country pop or hip hop. Similarly, traditional Japanese gagaku and Korean pansori are rarely acknowledged outside of scholarly or ceremonial settings. Because these art forms are frequently passed down orally or through apprentice, when newer generations lose interest due to societal pressure to pursue more profitable or modern jobs, the expertise dies with the elder generation. Now, I am going to talk about how the media portrays, the culture, the indigenous culture actually. I have attached here, you can see a collage, right, where we have the African culture. And if you remember, when the US was founded, previously it was inhabited by the Red Indians, who were the natives of the place, but they were gradually replaced by the colonizers, and now the US, we can say, is a combination of cultures, of African cultures, of South American cultures, of European, of New Zealand. It has become actually, a potpourri of cultures. The media also portrays folk culture as distorted, caricatured or marginalized. This leads to these civilizations being misrepresented or stigmatized as backward or primitive. Modern media such as film, television and the internet tend to emphasize globalized culture, portraying traditional culture as antiquated or strange rather than a living, changing tradition. Many Hollywood films depict Native American civilizations in a cliché or romanticized manner, which does not fully reflect the diversity of indigenous culture. This misconception reinforces the notion that native cultures are relics of the past rather than active, changing ways of life. Many films and television shows use folk cultures as visual or narrative backdrops, which are sometimes reduced to cliché. For example, in Hollywood films, indigenous culture such as Native American tribes are typically portrayed as heroic savages or mystical spiritual guides. Movies such as The Lone Ranger and older westerners frequently perpetuate misunderstandings about Native American practices. While Bollywood films celebrate Indian culture, they can portray rural folk traditions as archaic or superstitious in comparison to metropolitan westernized lifestyle. The media frequently portrays folk culture as display for tourists. It sometimes twists activities, like for example, in Bali and Morocco, traditional dances, dress and rituals are occasionally altered or exaggerated for tourist entertainment, diminishing their original cultural and spiritual importance. Folk festivals broadcast globally may concentrate the most visually appealing or dramatic parts, overshadowing deeper meanings or local variances. We also have, the platforms of YouTube and Instagram, which promotes viral recordings of unusual traditional behaviors without context. For example, the clips of indigenous tribes from Africa and South America are frequently shared with sensational captions, perpetuating the perception of these civilizations as exotic, primitive or alien. For example, if you remember or no, if you study theory, we have a very prominent theorist called Edward Said, who in his book Orientalism wrote how the Occident or the West views the East or the Oriental. For the Occident or the West, the East is a land, of mysticism, and you can say mystery even, and of snake charmers and epidemics and people who are not human but semi-human, or you can say equal to animals. That is how the West or the Occident views the East. Traditional cultures are also highlighted in news coverage during crisis or in contrast to modern society. During natural disasters or conflicts, the media may portray impacted indigenous or rural communities as helpless or regressive, neglecting their resilience and agency. While some documentaries provide respectful, in-depth insights into folk culture, others fall into the trap of exoticism or a colonial lens, emphasizing how different these people are rather than what they value. As I have given you the example of Edward Said. So, what happens is that the Occident, the West, views the Orient or the East as from a colonial mindset, from a colonial perspective, and it is a land which should not be invaded, the East actually, very normally. But sometimes they have the idea that the people of the East can be colonized, they can be made slaves, but they can never be the masters. Now, I will talk about the divide between younger and older generations. They hasten the decline of folk culture. Younger people frequently regard folk practices as unimportant to their modern globalized existence, and they are more interested in following trends influenced by pop culture, technology and consumption. For example, the weaving or the knitting in Chinese teenagers are uninterested in rural traditions such as tea making, traditional Chinese medicine and folk dance. These traditions are frequently considered as antiquated in compared to the fast-paced, technology-driven environment that young people now live in. These changes reflect a larger shift as younger generations embrace technology, ease and global connectivity. They frequently separate themselves intentionally or unintentionally from the slower community-based activities of folk culture. Now we come to the end of the first lecture of the 10th module, and here I would like to say that the shaming of folk culture in modern society indicates underlying issues of cultural dominance, economic pressures and a shift in morals. As old customs and identities are increasingly regarded as inferior or antiquated, communities lose an important component of their social fabric. Folk culture degradation is more than just the loss of art of rituals. It also includes the erosion of cultural diversity and the loss of ways of giving that promote connection, history and collective memory. To conserve and respect folk cultures, society must recognize the value of cultural diversity and develop ways to celebrate these traditions rather than degrade them as a result of globalization. And also in the recent view, as I have said you, of the Afro-Americans, the Africans, and the other we can say religion we have and the other tribes we have. Nowadays if we see that as previously, as compared to previously how the Africans were portrayed, nowadays we see that the filmmakers from the West are portraying the African culture in a better light. For example, we have the very famous movie released some years earlier called the Black Panther, right? And it showed how African civilization was so technologically advanced that it was kind of ruling other empires. So that is also a way how the modern society, or you can say the West, has tried to incorporate the folk, or you can say the African culture, into the mainstream culture. So modern society also has its problems, but is also had its acceptance, and that we can view it now. Thank you.